Hello and welcome. Hey, John,
Hey.
we're live.
Oh, we're live. Oh, I can't hear you.
All right. Well, I can hear you. So we'll go ahead and,
We're having technical issues. Lo and behold.
you
Oh,
know,
you guys can't hear me.
I can hear you, but I'm not sure everybody can.
Okay. I can't hear the other Matt. So I will switch to my hotspot.
Okay.
Good
Yeah.
technology professional has a backup. Be right
That's how,
back.
that's how you can tell this is actually live. We're troubleshooting here in real time. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. I'll give myself as long an introduction as I possibly can while John sorts his technology out. I'm Matt Gordon. I'm a lead data architect for BJSS. John, if you can hear me, go ahead and introduce yourself now. Otherwise, I can do your intro as well and we can dive into it. You can't hear us. So, John Morehouse is he works for Denny Cherry and Associates Consulting. I believe your title is principal consultant, but we'll try to sort that out. The session that you're joining us for is using AI and SQL's vector functionality with SQL database in Fabric. So before we get into this, one of the things that I do want to talk about is although we're focusing on SQL database in Fabric today, because that was announced at Ignite a couple weeks ago, very exciting. I've already got some customers who said, this was kind of the missing piece to jump to Fabric. But a lot of what we're talking about, if you're sitting out there by the end of this and saying, oh man, this is really cool, but we haven't adopted Fabric yet. It was nice to learn about this, but I'm not actually going to be able to use it. A lot of what we're going to show you, including some of the demos, well, they might look a little different. A lot of this is available in Azure SQL as well. So while some of you may not have Fabric, I'm going to guess probably the majority or close to of the data folks out there probably have some flavor of Azure SQL database in their estate somewhere. And a lot of what we're going to show you in terms of stored procs that generate embeddings and things like that, not to give away some of what we're going to show, that would all work inside Azure SQL itself. So pretty exciting stuff. And you may be stuck with just me if we can't get John back. So we'll give John just a second, and then we'll actually go ahead and move on to the next few slides. Do you want to call your attention on this title slide here? So odds are you probably can't make all six of these. I know John and I are episode 3. So if you missed the first 2, if you're not sure you can make the next 3 next week, and hit that link, and it's got all the videos, resources, all that stuff. So very, very helpful, good stuff to learn here. And I think we have John back. John, if you can hear me, give a little wave. Okay, go ahead, introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the next few slides and off.
Yeah, so I am back. And I don't know if you all heard me when I left, but every IT professional who presents has a backup. So I switched my backup, so it actually worked. My name is John Morehouse. I'm a principal consultant with Denny Cherry and Associates. Happy to be here to talk to you about SQL database and Fabric, specifically using AI and the vector functionality. And so I'll leave it at that so we don't waste more time, and we can go to the next slides.
Yes, I riffed on that first slide as long as I possibly can. So as you've already seen, this is live, and we want it to be interactive as well. So feel free to say hi, ask things in the chat. Some of those will be passed along to us. We have 2 amazing moderators that know more about this stuff than John and I that are hanging out in the chat as well. So they'll be great resources for you. And in fact, we may kick some things to them too. We'll see.
Yep.
But yeah, make it live and make it fun. So like I said, we are episode 3 of this. So obviously it started with a bit of an intro. There are 4 more episodes next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week. And all this forms kind of a cohesive, like 6-course intro to SQL databases in Fabric and all that fun stuff. If you missed the first 2, you can go back and catch the videos and all that. And this is also running in 2 different time slots as well. So I think we are known as the Pacific time. I believe there's one that runs on UTC as well.
Yep.
Before we get into the stuff, there is the Fabric Community Conference coming up. So the conference dates themselves are March 31st through April 2nd. As you'll notice, there are pre and post conference workshops, March 29th, 30th, and April 3rd. So don't miss out. There was the first one last year, and it was not only was it huge, there was a lot of good stuff, and not just Fabric stuff either. So if you're sitting out there saying, "I'm just here to learn," but we don't have this yet, there's lots of good content around databases, Azure SQL, AI, all the stuff you would want to hear about is out there as well. And if you're sitting out there and saying, "Gee, I'd love to try to speak at that," the call for speakers closes tomorrow.
Cool.
So you can go find that link on Sessionize and go ahead and get your talk submitted before the call closes tomorrow, I believe, evening. Anything else you want to say about that, John, before we dive into it?
Other than if you've never been to Vegas, Vegas is a really cool place to go just visit. So why don't you go and learn some new stuff about Fabric and Microsoft technologies and visit an awesome place. I love Vegas. It's a great town.
Fair to say, whether you love it or hate it, it's worth seeing once. It's
at least once,
a very
right?
unique city.
Yep.
Yes.
Very unique city for sure. So I mean, that's one of those things that I think that you should go visit Vegas once at least if you can. So I totally agree.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, conference was a great time. Tons of great content as well. Like I've already talked to a couple clients of mine that say, "Oh, we know that's kind of the next big conference. We don't have Fabric yet." Doesn't matter. You could have a great 3 days and probably not go to a session on Fabric the whole time, or you could spend your whole time in that. So let's talk a little bit about SQL databases in Fabric and AI and vector stuff. So why do we want to do this? So I would imagine, a lot of us are coming from different kind of data professional roles. We've probably got some data viz folks out there. We've probably got some DBAs. We've probably got some database devs and people that wear all those hats and more. So, why do we care about AI around our databases, in our databases? Like, why is integrating all that stuff important? And some of that is probably because our boss says, "Hey, you need to learn how to do this," because our board, our management, our executives, whatever, says we have to AI all the things. So we have to figure out how to do that. John, I'm sure you're seeing some clients just like I am.
Yeah.
They're like, "Hey, we need AI. We don't know what that means. Please help us." But we know it's built on data, and off we go.
Yep. AI is becoming significantly more mainstream. And so we are definitely starting to see an uptick in clients wanting to integrate AI with their applications and their own data. So for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, like I've told people, my dad's a car guy, not a tech guy in any way at all. And when he started asking me about this stuff, that's how you know it hit the mainstream.
Yep.
He has no idea what I do for work at all, but he thinks it might have something to do with this stuff. So let's talk about it. So why would we use SQL? That's for those of you who may know a little bit about this, and I'm assuming we have kind of a spread. There's probably people who are experts in this. There's probably people who are just coming to figure out, like, okay, AI, SQL, and Fabric, what are we doing here? Why would we use SQL for that? If you know a little bit about this, you'll know that there are specialized databases that are just used to store vectors. And if you're not sure what those are, we're going to explain that here in a bit. There's specialized databases for graph and things like that. So why use SQL? We've used SQL and SQL Server and Azure SQL and all that stuff for all kinds of things. Why this? So we need to be able to store data, which obviously a database like Azure SQL and SQL in Fabric does very, very well. AI needs data. So
lots of data.
And what kind of data does it need, John? Is it just data? We don't care if it's good or not, just a bunch of data, or something a little better?
That's a great question. And for the most part, like, we need to, let me back up just a little bit. So like using language models with AI, you had to train those models. So you had to curate your data specifically for those language models so that AI can respond effectively. And so you do have to curate your data smartly. In other words, if I've got a table that's got 500 columns, I don't want to AI the entire 500 columns, right? So we have to be specific in what we want to send to AI in those models so that we get effective returns out of the like the chat bots. That's a good example. So it does matter what data we have for sure.
Yeah, well, and if you followed the news around this at all, there's been a bunch of stories, some funny, some not, of chatbots and other kind of AI assistants and things like that, either leading people astray and leading them to wrong answers, or committing a company to selling a truck for $1 or selling
Yep.
a plane ticket for $1, because none of this stuff is perfect. If it's not built and grounded on good data, it's going to make those mistakes much more easily.
Yep.
So even though this is all really cool stuff, and we hope you're going to love what you see across the next half an hour or so, the reality is that old school uh, data cleansing, data quality, all like that, it's not that it's gone away. We haven't moved away from that at all. We've actually made it much more important. Like it's we're relying on our data to do a lot more, and it's not necessarily passing through human hands after that. So definitely very, very important. And the nice thing is, like, you probably want this somewhere while we're trying to learn all this new stuff. You probably want this somewhere that you kind of know. Maybe you love it, maybe you don't, but it's an environment that you know. It uses tools that you know. So there's less possibility of making a mistake that way, where you're trying to learn a bunch of new stuff and a new tool and a new system and all that. And I suspect most of us here, even if we've not used Azure SQL, we've used SQL Server and T-SQL in some way. And that's what that's a lot of what we're going to talk about after that.
For sure.
Anything else you want to share here, John, before we move on to the next little bit of this slide?
Nope.
Okay.
Move forward.
Fancy animation. So, a little bit of marketing speak here, sure. But like we said, I've worked with a lot of clients where they've been on SQL Server on-prem for a long time. You then move to kind of a hybrid where you're spread across SQL Server on-prem. You've got some of it on VMs in Azure. You're starting to put it into Azure SQL, and then SQL and Fabric is going to be that next thing. So why wouldn't we, basically put the AI or move the AI to where our data already is, instead of moving the data around a bunch? One of the things about Fabric with one lake and all that is, in theory, you've got a single point where all of your data lives. You don't have to ship copies everywhere, to do certain things. So why don't we kind of bundle the AI in there as well?
I think an interesting aspect of that is this right here with data gravity, and the notion of bringing the data, bringing the AI to the data, right? That's kind of what we're talking about here. There are, as you mentioned, there are other databases that are specifically designed to manage vectorized data. That's another component that I have to go learn.
Right.
And as data professionals, most flavors of databases are pretty similar, but they all have their own nuances. And using SQL, one of the best taglines that I've always liked was, "It's just SQL." Right. So if we're using something we already know, I don't have to go learn that other database's nuances in order to facilitate using AI. I can use a database platform that I'm very comfortable with. So I think that's really important here, right? And so I think that's really smart for Microsoft to do that too.
Yeah, and you
bring
could say
AI to the data.
Right. And as the size of the shop grows, odds are these kind of specialized databases for vectors and graph and all of that, they might not be supported by the DBA team you've worked with for
Yep.
all of your SQL stuff. It may be a special projects team, it may be an AI team. So even not that we want to spend a lot of time talking about this, but things can break, things can have issues, and I'd kind of prefer to deal with the team that I've probably been dealing with for a while, rather than maybe a new team who's also just ramping up on this stuff. Not to say they can't get there, but so many of the clients I talk to, not only do they need kind of AI to be defined, like what is it and what can we do with it, they need it fast.
Yes.
So,
Tomorrow.
if I
It's
come
always
back to
tomorrow.
them and say, we've got this specialized set of databases and tools, we're going to teach it to your people for 90 days, and then we're going to build some cool stuff, that's going to be an absolute non-starter. So,
Yep. So I think, like I said, I think this is a smart decision to bring AI to the SQL world. Because we can deploy things a little bit faster. So get clients up to speed faster without having to go learn that third-party vector database technology.
Yeah, this is true. Okay, so how do we do that? So some of this, I'm going to guess you might be lightly familiar with. We'll kind of talk through, kind of these three basic patterns, and it's all around building. I call these scalable AI apps. Like we've talked about, there's really data underpinning all of this. So, the first, well, these really aren't in order, so we'll just go left to right. We can talk about vector search, which is really just adding the ability to search vectors along with the data queries we've known and loved for years and years and years. That's one pattern you'll see. It's certainly something we're going to talk about here in a bit. John, you want to chat about structured queries at all? Although, well, you know what? Let's go to RAG pattern next, and then we'll wrap up with that third one.
Sure. So the RAG pattern is in conjunction with the vectors, right? So now in SQL, we can store those vectors. Let me back up. We can take data and then generate the vectors in the embeddings and actually store them in our database. And then we can use those vectors in conjunction with an AI model using T-SQL queries to generate semantic query results out of our data. And so that RAG pattern is that we can actually use the AI with our own data to answer questions about it in natural language. And I'm going to pick on English just because I'm an English speaker, but I can use English to say, give me some answers around, like, I need semantic information around what's the best thing for a birthday party, as an example. That's an example that one of the demos that Microsoft has delivered. But we can do that.
Yeah, so we lost you there a bit, but yeah. Oh. So what it does, you're back now. What it does is it gives you the ability also to continually update that too. I know.
Yes.
I think one of the more interesting demos I saw, kind of back when ChatGPT started to get cool, was depending on the model you talk to, you could ask it who the ruler of England was. Well, one of the models had stopped training before the Queen passed away. So it thought it was her, even though she had passed away a year or two before then. And it would also misstate her age as well, because it's kind of reasoning through that. It's okay, she was born this time, she's the queen. It's now this date, she's this old, and she's still the queen, because it didn't know better. So if you want to kind of simplify what a RAG pattern is, like we're grounding it with data that can be updated. So you'll see a lot of demos around like a product catalog or something like that. Let's say we get a new shipment of funny shirts in, and I want to know what the updated funny shirts are. That's a way to feed that without relying on a model that may or not have been trained on what those shirts are.
Yep.
Yeah, and all this kind of wraps up with, like John said, the ability to use T-SQL and stuff we're pretty familiar with to query not just data, but query models and ways all of this data are stored to give us richer result sets and to be able to tell our boss, like, yeah, not only do we have a database in the cloud, but oh, by the way, we're using AI to help power the search. We're using it to refine results and things like that. And we always want to keep our boss happy, right?
I hope so. I want to stay employed. So yes,
for sure. Okay, so what we're going to do, that's been a lot of talking. Let's look at some stuff. So we'll go ahead and tell you right now that these are recorded. Obviously, there's not a lot of places you can go play with this stuff just yet, but that's going to change really, really soon. So you may see John and I kind of pause to talk about some stuff and things like that. So while we could do this live, this ensures kind of better experience for everybody. And we wanted to be upfront about that. So without further ado, if it'll play nicely for me here, let's give this a whirl. All right. So yeah, what we're doing here, so if you're really not familiar with Azure at all, what we were doing, except it appears to have stopped, is, hang on. Okay, there we go. So we're creating a resource group. So if you're not familiar with that, it's just kind of a way to organize resources that you have in Azure, whether it's by project, by person, by client, by whatever.
It's a container.
Yeah. Just kind of a grouping of stuff. We're putting a tag on it here just so you can see who it is that owns it. And we kind of hop through here. We're going to go to the resource group we just made. And what you're going to watch here is basically an OpenAI resource be deployed. So we're in the resource group. You go up to the top there, and you could do this with anything, whether you're creating Azure SQL, all kinds of stuff. But we need this OpenAI resource in Azure to be able to talk to it from the SQL in Fabric stuff. And yeah, there's
the OpenAI.
What was that?
And here we create the OpenAI service.
Yeah. There's really no way to make this very exciting. But it is kind of important because I know it's frustrated me over the years sometimes when you go to a talk on like new stuff and then they don't tell you how to make the new stuff.
Yeah. Well,
like, that's really cool. I have no idea how to actually set that up.
So I'll throw this out there because some of these demos, yeah. There is out in GitHub. One of our moderators, Davide, actually released a demo of all of this that you can go to GitHub and fetch, and that demo will walk you all through this. And it's pretty straightforward. Davide did an excellent job on making comments and making sure that everything was there to get it deployed. I actually did this in my own tenant, and it worked well. Here we can see the AI deployment was complete.
Yeah, and then from there, we're going to go to that resource. And then from here, you're going to see the mouse go up here in a second after we look around. So you can get your endpoints and your keys there. You have to click in those to view them. You can think of those as like a connection string and a password.
Yep.
Kind of. So we're going to hop from there to the Azure OpenAI Studio, which you'll note Microsoft loves to have studio experiences for everything. So if you played with any of the AI stuff at all, there's a studio experience for Azure OpenAI. There's a studio experience for the language service, for the vision service. And so what we're doing here is we're picking an embedding model basically for what the demo is designed around. So if you're an expert in this stuff and you're sitting there and be like, oh, that's not the best one, or that's not the newest one, these are going to change all the time. But you're going in here to actually deploy this model because we'll need the model. So all the T-SQL we write later to create embeddings and all that stuff, we need this there to call it.
Yeah, and here this target endpoint and key are important. Sorry, I just about spilled my Gatorade.
They are important, and because we're using like really fancy technical stuff here, we want to make sure we're using state-of-the-art tooling for all of this. So if you're building this yourself and you know you need that endpoint and key somewhere, because we're going to have to paste it into this T-SQL code later, use something state-of-the-art and next generation like Notepad. Very important.
I think next we're going to talk about vector databases and embeddings.
We are.
Sweet. Oh, here you're restarting here.
Yeah, it's PowerPoint's in a bit of a mood. It's roughly 19 degrees where I am, and I think PowerPoint just wants to go back to bed. But we're gonna coax it back to life here. So yes, we're gonna talk about vector databases next. Did you want to dive into this a bit?
Sure. So when I started to look at this, I struggled with vectors and embeddings, like trying to understand really what those means. And really, when we talk about vectors and embeddings, when it comes to the AI context, we're talking about taking data and transforming it into a numerical value that computers can do something with, right? So in this case, we're talking about a dog. So we can see there on the slide on the right-hand side, we've got a dog that has certain aspects to it, such as it's brown, it might be It's tall, it's short, it's furry, not furry, it's hyper, not hyper. It sheds, it doesn't shed. So there's attributes about the data that we can send to OpenAI, and when the OpenAI model that you saw that was created in the demo comes back, it will come back as a numerical matrix. So just like that. So there we can see we actually have numerical data, and for us as humans, it's pretty much gibberish, from my understanding. Like we can't make sense of what those numerical values really mean, but the computer can use that information to decipher and determine information from it based off similarities, and it does that from next slide.
Yes,
Using lots of math. And so it actually uses cosine. So if we look at the number, so up in the upper left-hand corner, we see apple and banana, and then the lower right, we see dog and cat. We can see, and I think if you advance one more slide.
Yes, let me bump this because, yeah, there's an explanation coming right there. Yep.
Yeah. So with using the matrix of numbers that came back from the model, and this is what gets stored. So if you think about the overall story of SQL and Fabric and using AI and vectors in SQL, you can kind of start to see that we can send our own data to an AI model and come back with our own matrix, and then we store this matrix in our database itself. It's not going to be stored in a third-party database somewhere else or some JSON file somewhere. It's actually stored in the database itself. So it's residing right next to the data that we use to create the embeddings. But the computer can utilize cosine between the matrices and the numbers within it to determine how similar the answers are, right? So if we do, I think one more.
Yeah, because it goes down there.
Oh, it took the other one off though. Go back.
I can flip back and forth really fast so we can see them both.
So here we can see that apple and banana aren't that similar or close to dog, right? So we know that a couple fruits are not the same as a dog. But now if we start to look at between like a dog and a cat in terms of the cosine of the numeric values, they're closer in value, right? So that mathematical result tells us that that data are more similar than what apple and banana are.
Yeah.
Right?
Basically, in layman's terms, you're measuring the angles between them and kind of using that as a proxy for the similarity between those. And that's probably as qualified as I am to dig into the math.
Well, and it always makes me think that way back when I was in high school, where we always say that we're not going to use this level of math later in life. We don't need it. Well, now we are. We're using cosine to actually use it in technology with artificial intelligence. So yes. I always think that's funny myself, but Mr. Paul, a high school math teacher, would probably be laughing at me right now.
There were teachers that said you'll use this every day of your life, and most of that has proven to be untrue. But it is funny that we're now interacting with things probably every day of our lives that do use that knowledge.
Yep.
So our teachers were kind of right, which is no fun to admit, but yeah. So hopefully you kind of understand there, what a vector is in space. Like, hopefully that graph does a decent job of saying, the closer things are together, the less that angle is, the more similar they are. So we can, kind of bundle that around a query, a search that we all know and understand. But why would we want to use vectors in a database? So let me click through here. This slide. Oops, here we go. Hang on. Okay, so this slide's acting a little weird. So this kind of looks like a query you might write, but just kind of in blocks. So we're looking for a teriyaki restaurant in Seattle, which, like that says, that's the quality search. It's going to be a city field, which you can see over to the right there. We want it to be within 5 kilometers of where we are. That's a geospatial search. So if you draw over to the right, you're going to see that's actually a geography point. And I think I might have just talked over you, John.
Nope.
Okay, cool. We then want it to be a family place. So that's probably going to be a regex to determine that. So that's an envarchar field there. And then we've got a couple inequality searches as well. We want the reviews to be good. We want it to be greater than 4 stars. And we want there to be enough. We want to make sure it's not just like the 2 people that have gone say it's great. We want to make sure that it's been open a bit. A lot of people have gone and think that it's really good. Okay, so how do we figure out some of the review stuff? So like we have to have that review text stored somewhere. So let me roll that animation back, and you can kind of see. So teriyaki. All right, so we've got it down to the review text there. As we step through that, you're going to see, right, this is so it may not just say teriyaki restaurant. It may say teriyaki sauce. It may say chicken teriyaki. It may just say teriyaki. It may be spelled wrong. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying we don't know exactly what that text is going to look like in those review statements. So as you said, like it could be misspelled, which I actually never thought of. It actually could be misspelled. And so we can use vectors to make sure that what you're looking for is close to that text. It doesn't have to be exact, but it can be close. And using mathematics, again, yes. Mr. Polly, I'm sorry I was wrong, that we can use the vectors to determine whether or not your search criteria is close to the value in those columns or the vectorized data, sorry.
Right. And if you're sitting out there saying, okay, well, we could have done that in SQL Server with like full text search or something like that. Absolutely true. But how many of us did that? And how did it work? This is certainly a more advanced, probably cleaner, more efficient way to do that. And then it allows you to build all this other stuff in as well. So as the fancy animation shows, we're using generative AI to do some of this. So like we've talked about, so if you've heard the term hybrid search, which if you've seen other Microsoft presentations around this, it's using queries that we already would have written. We just kind of walk through this one. And that's a query we could write mostly with data types we have, language we have, all that. But we're adding this second search to it, turning it into really a hybrid search. So that requires some vector support in Fabric SQL. And so what you see here is kind of the syntax of what that would look like as that support comes. As is the case with all this, obviously this was just announced a couple weeks ago. This is changing by the week, so definitely keep an eye on all the blogs, all the posts from the team on LinkedIn and all that, and you'll see some of the support that may or may not be there yet. You'll see it all start to roll in very, very soon. And if you're in a region or if you have a lot of resources in a region and you don't have this yet, keep an eye on there. That will change quickly. Okay, so what does vector support in Fabric SQL actually mean? So we get a new type. So you may have noticed in the previous slide, you're getting, you were showing the vectors kind of being stored in like a var binary. There will be a new type. So that just kind of makes it work a little better in our heads, I think, or at least mine.
Yeah, helps in mine.
Yeah. Because you're like, well, why is it a var binary? And it's like, no, that's a vector. I understand that that's a type. Obviously, we're going to give cast the ability to interact with vectors as well, which makes sense. To do some of the queries we just talked about on that last slide, it needs the ability to do that. So that's going to be part of the support as well. And then some things very specific to vectors to get the distance between two, like we talked about earlier. And then just some additional things to kind of scale those and refine those searches even more. So I think that's pretty cool stuff. How the heck are we going to use it? You want to talk about that, John, a bit, or we can kind of bounce this back and forth?
We can, and I think it's really cool too. I think it's really cool that they introduced a new data type to store those vectors. The big thing for me in terms of use cases is the chat bots. I can't go to any organizational website that doesn't have a chat bot on it that wants to interact with you and solve all your problems.
For better or worse.
Yeah. So sometimes they frustrate the fire out of me, but the chat bots is where I see a lot of organizations being really interested in this, because that chat bot assistant could interact with their own data about a customer or a product or the organization in itself, and have an interaction with the end user automatically. So this is where I think chat bots is really where it's going to come out with this. But we can still do that hybrid search, right? That very top item in the slide. We can still use that hybrid search that is using semantic searches with a full text search with the filters, and then generate that hybrid query against the vectorized data. But I think chatbots is where it's going to come out. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, honestly, that's been the right answer. Chatbots, virtual agents, like any client or prospect that I've talked to, and they're like, "Hey, we need AI in our environment. What do we build?"
Yeah.
That's where I think the quickest value is. Which is not to say there aren't things like around document intelligence and stuff like that also don't make sense. But for that, especially if you're looking for something quick, like we talked about earlier, a lot of this stuff, maybe it's set as a goal for your bonus or year end or something like that. It's like, hey, we just need AI in the something. Chatbots are the quickest way to get there. And you can build that over the data. You have an Azure SQL now, and now SQL in Fabric as well. And I like where this does a pretty good job of kind of contrasting with that last slide. I worked through that last slide in arguably a pretty boring way. Like, we're writing a query out loud, and kind of understanding, or at least thinking through how in T-SQL we might have written that. You don't have to worry about it now. That's a natural language search. So nobody sat down and wrote, select star from document where customer equals X and doesn't equal, all that stuff. Just said, find me the documents from this person that are tied to this thing. So yeah, I think that's, I think chatbots, if you're looking for an easy on-ramp, that makes a lot of sense here. If you've used any of the copilots around Azure SQL or anything like that, the natural language to SQL stuff is also kind of driving off the same thing. So if you've used it or you've seen Bob or Anna talk about those, that's being powered by a lot of the same stuff. Anything else we want to add here?
No, I was just going to highlight Copilot. Copilot would be another one that I think that will be very prevalent. So you already covered that.
Yep. Copilot, all the things, right?
Yep. Everything. Copilot.
Okay. So just to kind of take you back to what we did. So overall, if you watch the first two sessions of this, we're building an application that's going to help us kind of search for and rank session abstracts and other kind of session artifacts for a conference. And so in demo one, we created an OpenAI resource and kind of took a very brief tour of it. We deployed an embeddings model, and then we stopped there. So in demo two, what you're going to watch here is you're going to watch us actually talk T-SQL to this model. And so off we go there. Yep.
Well, I think this is a great example of it's still SQL.
Right. This isn't scary. Like, this is stuff like probably most of us know. So we're creating a credential here to talk to the OpenAI stuff. But yeah, that's not like new T-SQL.
Nope.
Just it's kind of what it was. But what's done here is we've built on this stuff. So you'll see the endpoint gets posted right in there. So like I said, we're using advanced tools like Notepad to get it in there. Those endpoints will have a lot of stuff after the main URL. You don't need that stuff. The key, which if you're not familiar with that term, is basically a password. We're going to put that here. So you're going to see that being pasted in there. And so, yeah, this is just giving us the ability to connect to the resource that we created last time out. And now we're going to switch over to actually getting the embedding itself. So we've got the credential here. And then what you'll see, this is just T-SQL, but we're actually calling a REST endpoint here. So if you're kind of not, you're like, okay, AI stuff isn't for me. I'm just kind of here hanging out, eating lunch or breakfast or whatever. I do kind of want to call it here that, and a lot of people don't know this based on the sessions I've done the last year or so, you can call REST endpoints from Azure SQL because you can do that. You can call them from SQL in Fabric. as well. So if there are other APIs you'd like to talk to that are outside this, we're not going to cover that obviously, but now you know that that ability exists and it's just there. And that's actually been there for some time, which I think is pretty cool. I'd never be accused of being a decent app dev, but it's nice to know that's there. And I can call an API once in a while.
So yeah, here we can see that embedding, right?
Does that mean anything to you, John?
No, no, but I'm glad the computer can decipher it
Yes.
and do some math on it.
Yes. So yeah, you'll see these strings are not like human readable. They're not necessarily relevant to us at all. But that's the end. So we called that resource we made, and and now we generated those embeddings, which tees up perfectly demo 3, which comes right after this. Imagine that, demo 3 coming right after demo 2. So before we get into this, so this will talk about working with the vectors. Now we've kind of talked through what vectors are, talked through to a certain extent what embeddings are at all. This kind of brings it all together to be able to create or to be able to leverage some of the stuff that we just built. So before I click go on this, John, do we want to talk about notebooks? So this is using a notebook within VS Code. You want to take a second for us to talk about how cool these things are if people don't know about them?
So I think notebooks are really cool. This is
Yeah.
a Jupyter notebook, right?
Yeah.
In that notebook, we can have, I always think of them as like segments or cells that actually have code that you can run to get results and actually store those results in the notebook itself. I think a lot of people use notebooks for like run books. So if something happens, they can kick off a notebook, and in that notebook, it's got a series of steps defined to go execute queries or do something, and then we store the results in that notebook so we can review it later. That's typically where I see notebooks. I'm not sure if you have different experience.
I would have, when I was an operational DBA, I would
have
have
killed for this.
injured people for this kind of stuff. Like it was, when you think back, and even a lot of the shops that I go to now, a lot of the run books are you're handing them off to a junior person, offshore, nearshore, whatever your setup is. It's a Word document, it's an Excel sheet, it's Notepad, it's a T-SQL file. The results are a screenshot that they're supposed to email back to you or put in a Teams chat. These can all be source controlled, number one, and the results persist, number two. So that if you're querying for secure data, you want to remember that it persists in there, and if you put it somewhere where prying eyes can see it, it's still going to be there. But yeah, I think notebooks are awesome. So that's our little soapbox about how notebooks are great and everybody should use them. You can use them in Azure Data Studio as well. This is VS Code running the Polyglot extension. So let's see the notebook do its thing here. And so, right, so you can see there's instructional text, and then we get into these code cells as well. So what it's doing is it's installing some kind of prereq stuff that it needs to do the SQL. So we're watching it go through that, and then we're connecting to. So basically, you're telling it like, all right, I'm going to use the MS SQL kernel. I'm going to connect to this database, and you see the string there. If you've got keen eyes there down in the lower right, you saw that was msft.database.fabric. So this is indeed SQL in Fabric. We're pulling the connection string out of there. That's already been pasted in. So you can run an entire notebook all at once, but what you're seeing as this kind of steps through is we're running it cell by cell, which for troubleshooting purposes, I always do first, because it's pretty hard to write one of these, especially it has this many steps. You can see we're about a third of the way through it and not make a mistake somewhere. So that dialog was basically selecting the database, make sure we're connected to the proper one. And then, as you may have noted, when we created the get embedding stored procedure last time out, then this is starting to use some of that stuff we made. And then there's also, we're writing some procs here. So right now we've got speakers and we have session abstracts, but they have no embeddings at all because we're just building the AI stuff around it now. So what we're doing here is creating procedures to give sessions embeddings so we can do those similarity searches on it. We're doing the same with speakers as well. And again, you see this is just T-SQL. We're going to disregard the cursor. There are a variety of ways to do that. That is certainly one of them.
It's just SQL though.
It is.
Which for me makes it less scary.
Yeah, I mean that's
mean,
I think it's fun to talk about this stuff, whether it's Azure SQL,
oh,
SQL and
absolutely.
Fabric. It's all just SQL, and it's not, it's kind of right there for us. So like if any of us are data pros dealing with SQL of any flavor at all, just about, this stuff's not hard to build around the data you all already have. There's lots of good resources. Docs has some excellent quick starts. I know I've built some session demos off those, and they are indeed quick starts. You can roll through those in probably 20-30 minutes, and then you're showing a lot of the stuff, and you can show off to your boss and your team, which is always cool too. And so yeah, we're going through here, and then this last bit, what we're doing is we're creating triggers. So we don't want to continually have to go update these embeddings all the time, because if you think of something like FabCon, there's probably going to be 1,000 sessions submitted. We don't want to have to go update all 1,000 all the time. So this is a trigger that's going to call that stored proc and say, when I get a new session, when a new speaker's added, we're going to give them embeddings as well, so we can do this kind of search around all that stuff. So again, none of that was scary. Cursors are a little scary, but it is just standard SQL. So
there are times and places for cursors even.
Absolutely. So yeah, so you see what this basically is here is, and it should animate. There we go. So yeah, this is inserting in the sessions. It's putting all the values in. This is a query set here, so that's being saved. And yeah, this is just inserting a bunch more sessions. So you can envision this like speakers, basically submitting a bunch of sessions all right before the deadline, like they always do, right?
That never happens. We submit early. We don't wait till the last 5 minutes to submit the session.
Well, of course, you and I always do. We would never wait until the last
yes
session. But other people. And so yeah, we're just adding a bunch of stuff, and then as you can see there, what that does is we've not generated embeddings again. We inserted stuff so that trigger fired to do just that. And then we're gonna, basically show off that those are there. And we're kind of, these aren't true tests, but you can see where we're inserting sessions with a new speaker, with an existing speaker, and all that, just to make sure that kind of every use case of the trigger fires. And and we're getting embeddings, because what you're going to see as these sessions roll on, and this is a demo I think that's going to be available to everybody, if not now, very soon. This stuff all builds on each other. So you want to make sure that we're doing kind of these core bits right, so the session app works really, really well. And I'll apologize for my dogs having spotted something very exciting outside that they want all of us to know about. Could be a squirrel, or in Kentucky, sometimes it's a horse, and horses are apparently even more exciting because they're big. So
I would like to just showcase also that this demo is done in the Fabric workspace itself. So you'll notice that we're not in Management Studio or Azure Data Studio. We're actually in the Fabric workspace itself doing SQL things. So really, we've consolidated the workspace to now you can do database stuff, you can do developer stuff, you can do business intelligence stuff with your data. It's all comprised into one workspace now, which is really cool.
It is, yeah. And we don't have to install a bunch of stuff and all that. So if you've used like an Azure SQL query editor in the past, this is kind of arguably the next generation. But yeah, very cool stuff. And then, so yeah, we have embeddings everywhere we're supposed to have them. We kind of tested all the use cases out there. This next slide is going to prompt all the wonderful folks for questions. So briefly check the chat, and it doesn't look like we have any questions headed our way. I'm sure the moderators, because they are amazing, are doing an awesome job, and that's why we don't have any.
Of course.
Yeah. So if you want to see any of all this stuff, that AKA link right there will get you to all this, aka.ms/SQL on Fabric/more. So if you want to get your hands on this and go play with it, and you can put resources in a region where this stuff is, you're going to be good to go there. So we've got a few minutes left.
Looks like we do have a quick question. Why can't I use a lake/warehouse versus SQL DB for this? I'm not sure I know that answer.
It's an interest. Well, so for me, it kind of makes sense because like the underlying structures are different. That's probably best for a Microsoft person to handle like the nitty gritty as to why that is. But I think that's one thing that's kind of interesting about Fabric. Like you said, we interact with so many of the elements in the same way, right? There's that single kind of development experience and all of that. And to a lot of us, if you don't know the structures underneath it, all it does kind of look the same. Like, well, if I can do this on SQL, why can't I do it on Lakehouse? Why can't I do it on Warehouse? But the software as a service part of this kind of abstracts us from that enough. The guts and the zeros and ones still work. So
Yep.
for me, I think that kind of makes sense now, especially having been fortunate enough to kind of follow the journey of Azure SQL in the same space. Like it's leveraging essentially SQL Server stuff, which those Lakehouse and Warehouse, they kind of have that wrapper around them, but at their core, they're different animals.
Yep, I'd agree.
All right,
cool.
Okay, so
I'm not sure what the question.
Yeah. All right, so you have been patient enough to sit with us through 51 minutes of episode 3, and we are just about done. Next week, so next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, same bat times, same bat channel. Episode 4 will be using GraphQL and application development with SQL database in Fabric, and then ALM/DevOps/ whatever we want to call it with all this stuff as well. And then we're going to wrap up with very important stuff: query and performance monitoring and tuning. Pretty important stuff even now, even with all the cool new stuff, right, John?
Oh, yes.
It needs to go fast.
Stuff. Yep, needs to go fast. You're always gotta perform it. Make sure it runs as fast as possible, right?
That's right. All about speed.
Yep, Vegas.
Yes. Do you want to talk through this slide? Because John, I think even though this conference is amazing, I think you're more positive on Vegas than I am.
Well, and so I like Vegas, even though and Vegas is very well known for gambling. I'm not a gambler, but Vegas is, I know, right? I think Vegas is great. They've got great food. I can't recommend more. Some of the restaurants they have around downtown and the Strip, even outside of Vegas, are really cool attractions that you can go visit. You can go. I know there's a tower where you can do like skydiving type stuff. So really, I like Vegas. I like going, even though I'm not a gambler. So it's a really cool town to at least experience, for sure. But beyond that, you've also obviously got the FabCon conference coming March 31st through April 2nd with pre-cons and post-cons, if you so desire. So you can register now and get signed up if you want to go. And like Matt said earlier, call for speakers ends tomorrow. So if you want to speak on some of this stuff, got to get it submitted by tomorrow. And it looks like we do have a couple follow-up questions if we want to try
that.
Quick.
Yeah. So we could take that first one. So it's basically at saying the vectors will be stored, but the embeddings will be made on demand. Yes, in that demo, there's the get embedding stored procedure that we do that makes the call out and does all the maths, or asks the model to do all the maths, gets the maths back. So it's on demand from that trigger, and that's the way. This stuff evolves pretty quick. That's the way the demos across the series were created to do it. Is that always going to be the way it works? Who knows? But that is the way it works right now. And this last question, I'd love to spend another hour talking about, but we can touch on it briefly. How is this better than Azure SQL? What does it really give us apart from better integration with the Fabric ecosystem? I would argue that is its main advantage right now. But like I said, I've talked to a couple customers where, generally because of size of shop or the way the company has grown, they wanted an operational database under Fabric, and it was keeping them from adopting Fabric because, there's an operational database next to it, but it's not in there. It doesn't fall under the same, kappa CUs and all that. And I've had a couple customers that were really interested in that like it brings that last piece of the puzzle into the data platform. So I think it's fair to say, I don't know if you have any thoughts different, but for me, just that better integration, especially for enterprise shops, that seems to be a compelling use case, that at least from the last week or two in the chats I've had.
I think you're spot on. Bringing the data into the One Lake world, the Fabric world, and so everything's in the same space, I think is one of the key components of this. Because like now I see developers and not necessarily DBAs per se being able to create the objects in the database and manage it on their own, all in one space, and talk to everything. That's what I think. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think before we wrap up, though, I have to give a special shout out to my mother, who's actually visiting us now and is watching this, or she's supposed to be. So I have to say, hi, Mom.
Well done.
Thank you.
Can't leave without that. But I think now it's time to give the people 4 or 5 minutes back and give them a friendly wave and a send off. So thanks for hanging out with us. Feel free to reach out on any of this. If we don't know, we could connect you with folks that do, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Thanks for joining.